What's up, investors? It's the Russian Jet. Russia's recruitment machine appears to have crossed a line that even many people inside the country's educational system are unwilling to accept. Because after years of offering enormous bonuses to struggling adults, approaching prisoners and labor migrants, and searching abroad for foreign records, the government is now turning towards high school students, university undergraduates, and even, believe it or not, young people at prestigious graduate schools in Moscow itself, in the capital, trying to present a defense ministry contract not as an open-ended road towards the front, but as an exciting shortcut towards money, status, academic benefits, and a career in military technology. And yes, it is not the first time we are guys talking about this particular exact topic, but today we will be talking about new, borderline war crimes level developments that Putin seems to personally greenlighted. At the same time, finally, more and more educational professionals started to protect their younglings, not letting military to take them away through deception. And this is a major shift in Russia's people's mindset. This is not only a story about dishonest recruiters, because it reveals the condition of the Russian military, the exhaustion of the Kremlin's existing manpower strategy to the critical levels at this point, and the growing confrontation between an aging leadership that sees only these young people as an available, expendable resource, and a generation that understands exactly what it is being asked to risk. And guys, as always, if you wish to show the support to our work and get an additional chapter in return at the end of each episode, please feel free to check our Patreon. The link is down below. There is 1 month's free trial, and your memberships are greatly appreciated. Thanks so much. Now let's begin. Here is a perspective most people do not think about, because when we hear that military recruitment took place inside a school or university, it is easy to assume that an entire institution, or at least most of it, willingly joined the campaign, there were recruiters on the first floor, and guys would just line up to sign up. Yet, the students' stories suggest that many teachers, professors, instructors, and even some draft officers are quietly trying to prevent the government from getting what it wants. Most Russian educators are not eager to hand their students over to the state, including ordinary professionals who may never protest or challenge an order, yet still understand that their responsibility is to educate and protect young people rather than transform a classroom into a literal recruiting office. Their resistance is rarely dramatic, because Russian institutions have developed an old survival mechanism in which people formally agree with the instructions from above, not during meetings, sign the necessary papers, and then quietly weaken the order during the implementation. So, like just making things slow or delaying the inevitable. So a mandatory ideological lesson becomes time for a test preparation, for example, a suspicious comment is ignored instead of reported, and a struggling student receives just one more passing grade, just enough to pass, once again, because even a mediocre lawyer, mechanic, or accountant has a better future than a talented quote-unquote young man trapped in military service. The same pattern exists during the elections, where teachers are treated as a government-dependent voting bloc and commission members receive instructions about the correct outcome, yet many still vote honestly. Which is why the system relies less on the majority than on a smaller group of careerists willing to manufacture the result demanded from above. That minority is now driving the pressure inside educational institutions, with students describing attempts to mislead, threaten, or even blackmail them openly by connecting a military contract to grades, academic standing, and future employment. While the administrators pushing these offers appear more concerned with satisfying their supervisors than with whatever happens after the signature of literal kid is collected. But there is a revealing complication, because some draft officers assigned to conduct the presentations have reportedly delivered the required promotional speech and then quietly warned the audience that the promised one-year contract is not real. Believe it. That service may continue indefinitely, and that the student is not choosing a temporary adventure, but entering a system from which leaving may be impossible while current orders remain in force. Military people doing this is just literal betrayal to the state, according to Putin. This does not excuse the campaign, of course, but it shows that the government is not operating with an ununified army of believers, because most teachers are not actively betraying their students. Many professors are reducing the pressure, and some officials are warning young people between the lines, while the entire operation depends on a relatively small number of administrators willing to turn institutional authority into coercion. But that is only half the story, because once we understand that the campaign is being pushed by a determined minority rather than embraced by the educational system, the unavoidable question is why the government has decided that students are worth targeting, and what happened to all the other groups that were supposed to provide an endless supply of recruits. Let's talk about it now. This is where things take an interesting turn, because the decision to approach students may look like a carefully designed strategy complete with speeches about patriotism, technology, and unmanned system forces, yet beneath that polished language appears to be a very simpler explanation, which is that the government has consumed way too much of the recruitment pool it relied upon, and is now searching for another group vulnerable enough to pressure. And once again, guess who it's gonna be? Unofficial data indicates that the Russian military's recruitment to personnel loss ratio has fallen below 1:1, meaning attrition is removing people faster than contract recruitment replaces them. And once that relationship becomes negative, which is, once again, it is right now, a system designed to avoid another politically dangerous mass mobilization faces a mathematical problem no television speech can ever solve. For several years, contract recruitment allowed the Kremlin to avoid demanding equal sacrifice from every large city and middle-class family, while the burden fell mainly on the people with debts, unstable employment, criminal histories, or little belief that civilian life would improve. Signing bonuses sometimes reached 5 million rubles just as a bonus alone. And the logic was intentionally overwhelming, because if a supermarket freight handler earns around 1,000 rubles per shift, approximately $12, while a contract promises an amount comparable to the 3 years of the supermarket director's salary, the immediate number can temporarily overpower any careful consideration of the hidden cost. The public nevertheless understands that no employer offers a person without a degree, rare expertise, or professional qualifications a fortune out of generosity. And when the payment is many times larger than anything available in normal life, the bonus itself becomes a warning that the risk is not a minor detail, but the entire reason the money is being offered in the first place. The free cheese is only in the mousetrap, as we say. For a time, the strategy drew from people who felt they had little to lose, while some families may have calculated that the signing payment and later compensation would provide more support than the recruit could earn over years, which reflects regional poverty but also explains how the system produced manpower without a nationwide draft. The problem is that this market is not unlimited, as potentially Putin thinks, because people willing to accept the danger for 1 million rubles are largely the same people willing to accept it later for 2, 3, or even 10 million rubles, especially when every one of those numbers exists so far beyond a normal income of approximately 20,000 rubles for them per month, that the difference just stops being concrete. A person who rejected the contract at 2 million is not automatically transformed into a volunteer when the offer rises by another million. It might be tempting, but if you don't wanna die, you don't wanna die. Which is why competition between regions often redistributes recruits rather than creating new ones. As in one example, for example, of a man from Pskov who traveled to Moscow for a 3 million ruble offer, even though he might have otherwise have accepted a 1 million ruble contract back at home in Pskov, allowing now wealthy Moscow to improve its statistics at poorer Pskov's expense. Once many of these people most willing to accept the deal had already signed, higher bonuses began moving in the same recruits around the map, and the authorities finally confronted the reality they had been postponing for years, which is that the supply of desperate adults was not renewable at the speed demanded by the war. Now keep this in mind, because when a centralized system exhausts one human resource, it rarely reconsiders the policy that consumed it and instead begins searching for another group that can be tempted, misled, or pressured through a different kind of vulnerability. If it works, don't change it. That's the main idea here. Just find another place where it will keep producing results. Now here is where things get tricky, because before students became the focus, the government appears to have explored foreign citizens from poorer countries and labor migrants already living in Russia. Yet both solutions looked far easier on paper than they proved to be in practice. The world contains places where even $1,000 can look life-changing, so recruiting abroad may appear to offer an enormous pool, but turning poverty into functioning military units requires far more than just an advertisement and a plane ticket. The image of, for example, selecting Kenyan peasants who may not even speak any Russian, transporting them next across the half the world, processing their documents, training them, overcoming communication barriers, and finally integrating them into existing units is not a realistic mass solution for an army already struggling with logistics, training quality, and rapid personnel replacement. While governments in the recruits countries of origin may even investigate or sentence citizens who accepted this literal mercenary work abroad. The next apparent obvious target was the labor migrant population inside Russia, with Russian passports offered as an incentive. But this idea also had obvious weaknesses, because the migrant population is not an endless reserve in Russia either. Russian passport is not necessarily the prestigious reward it once appeared to be. And most migrants came to earn money and send it home, rather than to enter somebody else's war and create legal problems with their own governments and countries. And so, once desperate Russian adults became harder to find, foreign recruitment provided difficult to scale, and migrant recruitment disappointed completely, students became the next logical category for a bureaucracy that views those people, the society, as just a sequence of manpower pools. From the planner's viewpoint, students have attractive qualities, because unlike a 50-year-old freight handler with a 30-year history of heavy drinking, a university student is just a fresh, green person, unspoiled one, more likely to be healthy, learn technical tasks, operate drones and communication equipment, and just in general remain physically useful for longer. Students are also young, inexperienced, financially dependent, and connected to government-funded institutions, which creates opportunities for pressures that do not exist with an independent adult, since administrator can imply that cooperation may affect grades, graduation, or future employment, even when those threats have absolutely no legitimate foundation. For someone just entering adulthood, whose best available side job may involve delivering food or flipping burgers for now 20,000 rubles per month, a presentation promising a large payment, social status, and a position in the safe, quote-unquote, unmanned systems forces can initially sound more like a government career program than an open-ended military commitment. That is why recruiters emphasize drones, special terms, and supposed one-year contracts, as we all know, never end in just 1 year, because they want the student picturing a clean technical role and a quick return to university, rather than unpredictable assignment near Kupiansk. Yet, there is no dependable wall separating a promised drone position from the wider military, as we all know, no guarantee that a technical operator remains far from the danger, and no reliable one-year exit, while the partial mobilization orders remain inactive, remain in effect until now, until then, and most likely longer in the future. A student may therefore believe he is selecting a temporary specialty when actually surrendering just his control over when his service ends, whether that happens a month or 3 years later down the road, but just when the government appears to have identified the perfect combination of youth, health, dependence, and inexperience, it encounters the factor its planners repeatedly underestimate. Russian students are not nearly as isolated, uninformed, or obedient as the aging leadership assumes. This is the new generation that Putin still is learning. Let's talk about right now. Here is what you might not expect, because the state seems to have selected students partially on the assumption that youth makes people easier to deceive. Yet the same generation is also the most comfortable with VPNs, Telegram, independent channels, and so-called foreign agent media, while routinely checking an official claim against several unofficial sources before making a decision that could and most likely will determine the rest of their lives. Messages from high school students, trade school students, university undergraduates, and graduate students show that many recognize the pressure immediately, and they do so by comparing experiences, checking the rules, and contacting independent journalists and creators. And that reaction matters because the government needs manpower rather than controversy. And every leaked presentation, promised academic benefit, this interview on YouTube about student being contacted by the military, and an example of administrator pressuring students transforms this entire program from a quiet recruitment pipeline into a warning delivered directly to the next group of targets. Young people understand the reality recruiters try to bury beneath numbers and patriotic language, which is that money, grade, status, and even a university diploma have very limited value if the contract removes control over their future, while a payment that looks enormous at 18 or 19 years of age cannot compensate for the possibility that these people may never even be able to return to use this money. This generation has watched the government block websites, label critics foreign agents, restrict communication, and present failures as victories, so official confidence does not produce trust. And the more aggressively an institution calls the offer safe, temporary, prestigious, and voluntarily, the more obvious the concealment becomes. Many teachers and professors understand this as well, creating an informal alliance between students who do not simply want to be manipulated and educators who do not want to become instruments of that manipulation. And although neither side may openly challenge the authorities, at least not now, hopefully sooner they will, well, they still can at least slow the campaign through honest private warnings, flexible grading, and the refusal to punish students who decline. The political leadership has long viewed young Russians with suspicion because they consume uncensored information, communicate internationally, and imagine a future beyond institutions controlled by the same ruling class, making them not only a recruitment pool, but also the people the authorities fear the most may one day gather in public squares and demand change. So sending these politically unreliable young men away may therefore appear useful twice over, because first, it provides personnel, and second, while reducing the number of connected and energetic citizens who might challenge the system. Two birds with one stone, the Kremlin thinks. Yet the flood of the messages shows that many are responding clearly. You do not represent us, and you cannot transform our education into a pipeline for an aggressive war against Ukrainians for the goals of officials who are long past the age of taking the risks they demand from others. This is exactly why Russia must never be confused with the Russian government, because the country still contains decent teachers, skeptical students, reluctant officials, and millions who understand that loyalty to Russia does not require loyalty to one man's disastrous choices. But there is still one more piece to the story, because for the first time ever, a small number of educational professionals are choosing the completely opposite path. Let's talk about right now. Let's focus particularly on this last chapter, because there is something deeper going on. Systems like this survive not only through orders issued in Moscow, but through individuals in schools, universities, ministries, and local administrations who decide that pleasing the person above them matters more than protecting the people below them. One reported example is Yulia Khadyulina, the principal of a trade school in Kazan, who became notorious after allegedly threatening academic consequences for students who refused to sign and called them cowards and traitors. And whether every detail of every individual report is ultimately confirmed or not, the broader pattern described by students is too serious to dismiss as just harmless career counseling. A teacher, professor, dean, or principal holds the authority over young people because society assumes that this power will be used to educate, guide, and protect them. So when that authority is redirected toward pressuring students into an open-ended defense ministry contract, the educational professional is not simply following an unpleasant instruction from above, but betraying the central purpose of his profession. The excuses are, as you'd expect, predictable, including fear of supervisors, job loss, and family responsibilities. And resisting authority in Russia does carry real costs. But there remains an enormous difference between avoiding public dissent and actively threatening a student. Nobody is demanding that every principal stand on a stage and denounce the Kremlin. Yet there are countless ways to comply slowly, avoid coercion, soften the pressure, or simply refuse to become the most enthusiastic person in the room. just as generations of Russian teachers learned to protect students during periods that were in many ways even more repressive in the past. If an educator cannot find any way to avoid pushing a young person towards a contract that may last 1 month, 1 year, or 3 years without a genuine path home, then that educator should reconsider whether they even belong in a profession built on responsibility for other people's children. Claims about so-called special 1-year contracts or protected arrangements for drone operators deserve even more extreme skepticism, because the partial mobilization orders remain active, contract termination is heavily restricted, assignments can't change, and a student who signs away control cannot rely on a recruiter's verbal promise after the paperwork has already been processed. This is why recordings, promises, and pressure tactics matter, because authoritarian systems depend on isolation of each individual, with each target believing that the threat is unique towards this person only, and resistance therefore is pointless. And then, the discovery that the same script is being used in Moscow, Kazan, Pskov, schools across pretty much entire Russia's heartland, makes the manipulation even now easier to recognize. Students' identities must never be published without consent, but anonymous accounts and carefully edited recordings can expose the mechanics without endangering the people who reported them. And although the government may rename the program, change the bonus, promote another military specialty, or shift its attention between universities and high schools, the underlying problem unfortunately still remains unchanged, which is that a system losing personnel faster than it replaces them must keep searching for new groups constantly, and every new group eventually learns why the previous one disappeared. Guys, please subscribe to our channel, like this video if today's episode helped you a lot to understand not only what the Russian government is doing, but also why it is doing it. Because the more closely we examine this machinery behind these decisions, the more we look behind the scenes, the better we understand why and where Russia is heading, what the Kremlin is running out of, and why the people it expects to obey may be far less obedient than it believes. Don't forget about our Patreon as well, the link is down below. Thanks much for watching, see you in front.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe